Welcome to The Effective Lawyer, a podcast for ambitious attorneys who want to improve their practice. My name is Jack Zinda, and I'll be your host. In today's episode, we're going back in time to when I was a guest on Trial Lawyer Nation with Michael Cowen. We discussed my experience running a firm and practicing law, as well as the tips and tactics to scaling a practice and some of the processes we found very effective in our firm. I also learned a lot of great tips from Michael and some of the great things he's doing at his law firm as well.
How are you doing today, Jack?
I'm doing great. Having a great time at the TTLA annual conference.
Yeah, and for any listeners today noticing that there's an unusual amount of background noise, I apologize, but we're recording this at the TTLA conference. We got a room as far away from the conference down the hallway as we could find, but there's still people hanging outside talking. So just bear with us. It's free, so you can't get your money back. So, Jack, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm originally from East Texas. Grew up in Longview, which is, for those of you not from Texas, about 45 miles west of the Louisiana border. My dad owned a restaurant growing up, and so I grew up washing dishes, cooking, waiting tables, bartending, which was also great training for being a trial lawyer and learning how to talk to people.
I agree.
And it was a great experience. So,
actually, waiting tables was one of the things I look for when I hire young lawyers, because I'm finding that people that wait tables, when they have to deal with people and give them good service even when they're being unreasonable. And also you're working for tips, and when you've busted your butt for $2.17 an hour plus whatever someone else is willing to give you, you tend to appreciate what you make as a lawyer a little more, and you're a little more realistic about the value and the need to work hard.
If you can convince an upset someone in a happy hour that's upset to give you a tip, that's good training for trial work.
Absolutely. So you got to law school and got licensed about 2006.
Mm-hmm.
And so 12 years later, how big is your firm?
We currently have 63 members of the team and 23 attorneys.
Wow.
So,
in all in one office or different places?
We have 3 main offices, one in Austin, one in Denver, and then one in Dallas.
Oh, wow.
And our hub's primarily in Austin, where 16 of our attorneys are. We opened up in Denver 3 years ago, and I got licensed there, and several of our other attorneys did. And now we have 6 attorneys in that office, and then 1 in Dallas.
So making money in a state with caps.
Yeah, and it is a challenge, but it's beautiful in Colorado.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
That's a plus.
So basically, I wanted you to just give us a little of the story of how you go from 12 years ago being a new law school graduate to 12 years later having a law firm that's that big, and you do all personal injury law? We do exclusively personal injury law. Can you just give me a little bit of that story of how you start from getting out of school, getting a job for somebody else, and then over just a fairly short period of time building this business up? So it kind of starts where I was out of law school initially. I went to Baylor Law School, and after my second year of law school, my wife was still in college, and I had a few opportunities to go work in East Texas or in Houston at some really good law firms. I pushed all of those aside to go be close to my wife, and I found myself waiting tables in Round Rock, Texas, which I'd sworn I was done doing, and I would never wait tables again. I must have applied to over 150 law firms. Austin's a rough market.
It is, and I didn't realize that at the time. I didn't click that there's 300 attorneys graduating from UT every year. And I was fortunate enough to get offered a clerkship at a firm that did primarily family law. They asked me how much I wanted. I said I'd work for free. They said, "How's $8 an hour?" I said, "You got a deal?"
Wow.
And this was while I was still a law clerk during the summer. And I basically did whatever they need done. They had 2 attorneys at the time. I was the receptionist. I was the paralegal. I went to the courthouse. I talked to clients. And they had a handful of personal injury cases. And up to this point, I really hadn't given a lot of thought to doing plaintiff's work. But I found I really loved that part of the practice. And they offered me a position when I came out of law school to start ramping up and doing personal injury law. I had to do family law while I built up the practice at the time, and I realized very quickly that family law was not something I personally wanted to practice. So I tried to build up the PI practice as much as I could. And he also gave me the opportunity to be a big part of the business of running the firm. And so I took up a lot of space, and then he put me in charge of HR and of marketing and of management.
Wow.
And so that was kind of one of the beginnings of it.
And then at some point, how long did you work for someone else before you struck out?
I worked for him a little over a year and a half, close to 2 years. And my dad had always told me I was going to start my own law firm. And I told him, no way, I'm going to be at this firm the rest of my life. And, things changed, and I decided, this is the right step to take. My wife was very encouraging. We had just bought our house.
Wow.
Right. And it was right before the 2008 crash. And so bought the house, quit my job, stock market crashes, our house value goes down, and I opened my practice.
And were you a solo, or did you practice with somebody else at first?
I had a law partner who did business law, and he is now somewhat retired, and he's a county treasurer in Williamson County. And we started in Williamson County. He did business, and I did personal injury, and then we had an associate that did family law.
You started off doing personal injury work in Williamson County, Texas. And for those of the people, our listeners who are not from Texas, that is choosing one of the most difficult venues in the state as far as jury verdicts and case values to start in. How was that?
It was intentional, actually, that we picked that county, because I knew that Austin was very competitive, that Dallas was very competitive. So we went where the competition wasn't, and bad stuff happens, unfortunately, in Williamson County, just like anywhere else. And I was able to generate a lot of referrals that way by making inroads places where not a lot of other plaintiffs' lawyers were going. And so it turned out to be a really fortuitous move by focusing on Williamson County in the beginning.
And then how did your firm grow over the years?
I think it started with a plan. So I read a really great book early on in my career called the EMyth.
Yeah, I read that too.
Great book. And that kind of set me off to planning where I wanted the firm to go to. And I started off by drawing an org chart for what the firm would be like when we had 30 lawyers, who would be in charge of HR, finance, marketing, and then I worked my way backwards from there to where I was at then. While at the same time trying to make sure I focused on what the core principles that I wanted the firm to be about, while also making sure I'm still a practicing lawyer, because I didn't want to just become a CEO or just a business guy. I wanted to make sure I was still meeting with the clients, practicing law, because I think there's a lot of ways you can make money in this life. And the reason I like doing personal injury work is you get to help people and work with clients.
Did you actually work with like an EMyth, because they have like their consulting business, or did you just read the book?
I just read the book, and then I read the EMyth Attorney, which they had a little kind of a side version of it, and I think the EMyth is actually better than the EMyth Attorney personally, but I never used the consultants, but I just consumed a lot of literature on how to run a business.
I did. It helped, but you seem to run a bit better business than I do, despite the lack of consultant. I worked with a lot of consultants over the years, so always trying to figure out a way to do it better.
I think that's really smart, and I have as well. I think you've got to know what you don't know. I think a lot of times in our business, egos get in the way of success, whether it's on a case. You think you may be, you don't want to talk to your friend who does medical malpractice because you don't want to seem like you're not the best at that area, but you're going to help the client. And the same in business. You got to know that there's other people smarter that have more experience that you have that you can take from. And one thing that I wanted to make sure got taken away from this is nothing that I've done has been original, in the sense of it was other people's ideas and thoughts that I'm building on.
Yeah.
And it's all out there. And none of it's a trick. It's stuff that you can do by just being consistent.
So you have the vision of what you're going to be when you have, what you said, 30 attorneys?
Uh-huh.
And you only have 2. So I guess the first thing you do, you got to start getting some work. If you don't have any cases, you can't build the firm. So when there's just you that does PI, your partner does business law, how do you get cases? I mean, you're there in Williamson County.
We took a couple routes. One is we wanted to build a referral network of attorneys that sent us cases. We also wanted to make sure we kept our current clients and past clients in the loop. And then we wanted to do, broadcast marketing in the sense of not on TV, but on the internet, word of mouth, sponsoring events to bring in people that may not have heard of us. And it was all about creating systems. I just listened to your team speak about marketing, and a lot of the stuff you guys talked about was so true that it's about consistency. And so, for example, when it came to getting clients from other attorneys, I had a rule that I had to do at least 2 networking events a week. And we still have that with our attorneys, where they have to do 1 networking event a week, where they go have an intentional interaction with another lawyer that can bring in business to the firm. And it took about a year for that to start paying off. And I had attorneys that would send me 40 terrible cases, and I said, just keep sending them. And they would call and apologize. I'm sorry, I'm sending this bad case. I said, don't apologize. You send me everything. You can just forward them. I don't care if it's the worst case ever. I'll screen it and I'll tell you if I can take it or not. And those attorneys that were sending me bad cases started sending me really good cases.
Oh, wow.
And we really focused on bankruptcy lawyers, family law attorneys, criminal defense attorneys, and we really tried to foster an atmosphere of sharing. So we never came at it of, hey, you got this great case, why don't you send it to us? Say, hey, you have this case, here's our discovery. Here's how I would approach this deposition. Here's how you should handle this subrogation issue. And I think a lot of people, especially attorneys, think that doing personal injury law is a quick buck, is easy. And they soon realize, man, this is a lot of work.
Yeah, a lot of risk.
And a lot of risk.
And so even as a 3-year lawyer, then you were able to generate attorney referrals.
That's right. And part of it was being in Williamson County. And I think part of it was I looked older than I was. My wife gives me a hard time, says I looked 40 at age 22. And so I was able to build up relationships with more established attorneys because they didn't know anyone that was really doing PI in Williamson County. It was all Austin. And there's kind of a cross-town rivalry between Travis County and Williamson County, and you're either a Williamson County person or a Travis County person. They don't mix very often.
It's interesting. I started off similar. I was a 3-year lawyer, unintentionally out on my own, because not that I got fired, my boss quit, and I ended up with a law firm, and literally quit practicing PI law and went and became a public defender.
Wow!
And so I had to figure out how to get business, and so what I did was, nobody wanted to handle Allstate, low property damage, chiropractic only cases. And so I got to go try a bunch of cases. And, I was in the Rio Grande Valley, which can be a good venue, and won enough of them where, over the years I started getting better and better things. But I had to pay the dues for a long time doing that. It sounds like you had to do the same thing.
Very much so. I remember, and I look back at so many of the cases that I had early on that first, I was like, what was I thinking taking that case? And second, I can't believe I handled this way or that way. But I'll tell you, some of the best work I felt like I did on cases were some of those first cases that were really tough, liability cases that I only had 5 cases at the time. So I'm going to work the heck out of this case and really dive in and make sure that we get the best outcome we can, because I need this case to work out.
Yeah. And so then over the years, I guess, what did you do then to continue building that?
Well, so we're very analytical in our approach, and I say we because I think it all starts with having a great team. Something that it took me a long time to figure out is that who you hire is usually the most important decision you can make. My theory is if you hired amazing, brilliant people at every part of the organization and had a bad system, you're probably going to still be successful. If you have a great system and hire, people that aren't smart, that don't care, that don't work hard, you're going to fail even if you have the best system in the world.
Absolutely.
So it started with making sure we're getting great people. And that took a lot of trial and error because, you think about, do I want someone that's too expensive, too cheap? And we made every mistake you can think of. We hired people that were too expensive that didn't want to do the job that they had hired for, or someone we didn't pay enough for that they left for a better opportunity. And so it started with making sure we were hiring great people, and then creating a system where their success leads to shared success, and making sure the great people that we have stay with the team. And as they're getting more and more successful, we're all growing together. And so it started with creating a plan on how to hire people and how to find great people as we grew.
I struggle with that. Could you give me some advice of what you've learned how to hire great lawyers and legal assistants, for example?
I think first, experience is overrated.
Okay.
We hire a lot of really smart people that we can train and mold, but they've got to have that core core aspects of hunger. They have to be driven, they have to be smart, and they have to be hardworking. And I think organization is underrated significantly. I think they have to be very well organized to be a good lawyer or a good paralegal. And I think the interview is a lot of times the least important part of the job search process. So we have a great in-house recruiter that we just brought on about a year and a half ago. But before that, we did it all in-house or did it all ourselves. And so what I try to do is try to pick out data points that lead to attributes that I'm looking for in someone. So we were talking about waiting tables before. I really like people that have done blue collar or service industry jobs. And so I'll look for their resumes or anything that shows that. I like people that are problem solvers. And so we have everyone, whether it's an attorney or a staff member, take an aptitude test prior to their in-person interview. We've also done things in order to do a lot of screening, because one of the hardest things is you post a job and you get 300 resumes. And you've got to sit there after a long day of practicing law and go through all these resumes and figure out who the heck am I going to hire. So what we did was we do a Skype interview first, which is about 10 minutes long. And we tell the candidate, hey, this is going to be a 10-minute interview. That's the purpose of this. And then I'll watch those interviews of the people that we picked out at long stack, so I don't spend all day meeting with people. Because most of the time in an interview, you know in the first 5 minutes, this is not going to work out. But if it's in person, you feel obliged to spend an hour with them because you don't hurt their feelings.
Right. I found that interviews are the worst predictor of whether people are going to work out, because the people who interview best are the ones that are switching jobs every 6 months to a year because they have a lot of practice.
Yeah.
And some people, the people you want, what we found is people we want aren't necessarily the people looking for jobs either. That's a whole other topic of how you recruit people and how you find people. But it is so hard, and that's been the key to success. And I think your point that experience can be overrated. I don't know if you've ever found this, but we have systems that I think work. And one issue I've had when I've hired an experienced lawyer is they have something that's worked for them. And there's a great resistance to doing it our way. Mm-hmm. Have you experienced any of that?
I've experienced that more times than I can count with some really good lawyers. And so what I really try to do on the front end is warn them and say, hey, your system may be great for you, and my system may not be as good as yours. But if you're going to jump on with this, you got to do it our way. I look at our firm like a sports team, and part of my job is to be the coach. And I said, there's a right way, a wrong way, and it's our way. And it's important that we're all rowing in the same direction, and we'll just start spinning in circles. That a lot of times, but even then, sometimes it's tough to get them to buy in.
It really is, and I've just had to, unfortunately, say, look, this is the way we do things, and we would love to have you work here, but if you want to do it your way, there's entrepreneurial spirit. Go do it your way somewhere else.
I completely agree.
And that's, unfortunately, if you want to have the firm of your dreams, and you have to make sure that you have people doing it the way you want it done.
Mm-hmm.
And so what do you do to make sure then, can you describe some systems you do to make sure that the lawyers and other staff members you have are working up a case the way you want it worked up?
We do a lot of things that are unique. One is we developed our own practice management software. We have an in-house software developer.
Oh, really?
And we don't sell it. No one else uses it. And the cool thing about that is it can be customized. And so we have all of these checklists and processes and memos that we put in the software that'll send an alert if you're going against the firm strategy. And so it'll kind of alert you, hey, it's 120 days out from trial. Here's what you should be doing at the 120 days out. And a checklist automatically pops up and reminds them, here's the steps you need to take. It's also a way to train good habits. A great book I read, The Power of Habit, it sounds like a self-help book, but it's really a business book. And it's about how to build habits in both organizations and people. And we found the software and our processes and checklists help build the habits that lead to success. Because I think just like in sports, greatness is built by doing the right thing every single day. And one of our core principles is excellence always, which means we don't do a great job some of the time, we do a great job all the time. And I tell the team that's from the facts cover page to how you go to court. For example, we have a hearing checklist that every attorney has to follow, every attorney has to turn in, even if they've done 1,000 of them, and it says read the local rules. Because the most experienced attorney will forget to read the local rules, and because we practice in all these different jurisdictions, they'll show up and the judge will get mad at them because they didn't do something that the local rule said to do.
Yeah. Oh, I am going to find some time to sit down with you, my friend, because we do similar things. We have checklists. Unfortunately, I have Needles, which is a good program, and then we had to hire someone to build a dashboard on top of Needles to pull out the data in the form that I need to run a firm, which is not just looking at a case by case, but looking at a lawyer's docket of the firm. Are people doing what needs to be done on a case? And what I've really found is that, people resist systems saying, look, we're not building burgers at McDonald's. This is an art. And there's a lot of truth to that, because a case is an art and it needs long periods, I think, of uninterrupted time working on the creative aspect of the case, discovering the facts, working on our theories. But when you have the checklist to make sure that your medical records are proven up, that you found and named your before and after witnesses, that you have your, 90 days for experts, that you've hired all your experts and given them what they needed and have a discovery plan for getting them what else they're going to need to get the reports out. When that stuff happens automatically, then you can be free because you're not always panicking about the deadline you're about to miss.
Well, and I think that's a really great point. And what we try to do is build within our checklist and processes a lot of the creative side of, we do a thing called a litigation strategy memo before we file any lawsuit. And in that, we follow the rules of the road method, the reptile method, and you have to put in your rules, and there's a checklist. Does it meet all of the elements that is a good rule? And that stuff's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to do that. And so you force them to go through it, opposed to they're just kind of rushing it, copy and paste something from another case. We force the attorneys to figure out what witnesses are we going to call, what discovery, what's your budget on the case, and all of that's built in. And I think a lot of the times the resistance to the process is the resistance to doing that creative thinking, to actually thinking through it and not waiting until that comes upon you in the case.
Yeah, I've had people say, well, there's a life cycle to a case. There is, but when you plan it out early, it goes much better. And then the depositions go so much better when you know where you're going before you start. And the discovery, what you ask for, what you don't. I mean, in trucking cases, when I first started, I had a set of 283 requests for production. That I just gathered everybody's requests for production. I put them all together. I asked for a lot of things that I didn't need in 90% of the cases. I sometimes asked for the same thing 8 different ways because I didn't know what was important and what wasn't. Now that we're, more seasoned, we have a smaller, still pretty thorough list, and then other things we add depending on the type of the case.
Well, I think that's something that we've been really focusing on as well. I keep telling the younger attorneys, don't send discovery we don't need to send, because when you're before the judge on that motion to compel hearing, you need to come in with clean hands. And if you sent 500 requests for production and they're like, Your Honor, this is ridiculous, the judge will probably say, yeah, this is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
One other thing that we've done that I think is a little unique is we have a training and development attorney, because the second stage that's made us successful is not just hiring great people, but getting them up to speed as quickly as we can. And so that person's job is to bring up the new attorneys and paralegals, and we have a training certification system where the attorneys and paralegals demonstrate their ability to do certain things, whether it's a deposition, discovery, and based on their certifications, they allows them to handle different types of cases.
Wow. So
if you want to handle a trucking case at our firm, you have to get certified in trucking cases, which means you watch and read these CLEs. You sit second chair with some more seasoned attorneys at the firm through at least a certain number of cases. You take expert depositions, and it's almost like a class that verifies that you're able to do it. And then we have the senior attorneys actually do a confirmation. They fill out a little form saying, I confirm this person is going to excel handling trucking cases or premises cases, whatever type of case it might be.
And how did you find a training and development attorney?
Well, that was another kind of trial and error. I made up the position because I'd never heard of it before, and I was like, what would I call this, and who would we want to attract? And we were very lucky to get a very talented attorney, and she had been a practicing lawyer, really brilliant, had been on law review. It was kind of burnt out from litigation, but still wanted to be involved in cases. And she read our job posting and said, "This is for me." And she just came in and just loved it from day one.
That is brilliant. One of the things I've struggled with is I come up with these plans to do this. I have training plans, I have certification plans, and I'm never able to implement them. I'm going to confess, I have a lot of unimplemented plans and training and certification, and a lot of it's because I become my own roadblock. I commit to do too much of myself, and then I have to practice law, I have to run a firm, it doesn't happen. And then I've been having trouble finding the right person to put in charge of it. But that is, I'm so proud of you for actually doing that. And, a lot of us talk about that, but you actually done it.
Well, and what I try to do and that was a really tough decision actually, because, that's a big line item in your budget to bring on someone that's not generating revenue, who's an attorney. But what I try to think about is what time am I spending on that topic and how many cases could I be working on? And that's one of the things that I'm always evaluating each week, each month, is how much time did I get to spend on cases? And I consider it an unsuccessful month if I don't spend at least 60% of my time working on cases.
Yeah.
And so when I found myself spending 2/3 of my time training people, it's like, man, I need to figure out how to get this done.
That's brilliant.
Well, thank you.
I mean, I'm not blowing smoke up about that. That is, I'm really impressed. I'm glad we're doing it. If nothing else, I don't care if anyone else listens to this. I'm glad I'm sitting here.
Well, and the cool thing is through the software we've developed is like that's all in the system. So the attorney can do, it's kind of self-study. They check off when they've done it, and it's worked well so far. We do the same with paralegals, teach them how to e-file, and I have the same principle when it comes to legal assistants and paralegals. We hire really smart people out of college, and unfortunately, sometimes that means they're only with you a couple years because they want to go to law school. But you get really awesome people for that 2-year time frame that get up to speed super fast.
That's interesting. I was having an interesting conversation with another lawyer at a seminar last week when we were walking down the street to dinner. And Steve Gersten, he's been on the podcast. He's got another big firm that's run very well. When I started, and we're blessed to have some really good legal assistants at our firm, but we have to go through a lot of people to find them. Whereas when I started, there were a lot of superstar legal assistants out there. Mm-hmm. And Steve and I were talking because he's in Michigan and Texas. We've seen the same thing. And I think he hit the nail on the head is that 30 or 40 years ago, because we were hiring people with like 20 years experience, 20-something years ago. So let's say 40 years ago, there are a lot of really, really bright women that kind of got pigeonholed into being secretaries, assistants, and now they're lawyers, doctors, CEOs, and we're drawing from a different pool of people now. And then, a lot of people, like I said, that thank God for society are doing, different things rather than being kind of pigeonholed into being an assistant when they had the capacity to be a lawyer. But I think unless you're doing what you're doing, which is hiring those college grads or aspiring to be someone else, how do you find those people that are bright enough to be a lawyer but are willing to be an assistant for a while?
I think that's really hard. And we struggled with that with the law for a long time. And we hired some very experienced people who were great paralegals for other attorneys, but they really hated our systems. And it was very tough to get them, and a lot of them weren't as tech savvy. That the one thing that can be a negative at our firm is if you're not really good with technology, you can't survive at our place. Yeah. Because we're doing something new every day. We do video conferences, we do all sorts of things that if you don't feel comfortable with that, it's really tough to thrive there.
Yeah. Well, you have to be your firm. You can't. Once you make an exception, then you don't have a system anymore. That's
100% right.
And I learned that the hard way too. You just can't. Your rules are what you enforce, and if you don't enforce them, then you have no systems.
Zinda Law Group is a plaintiff's personal injury law firm made up of over 30 lawyers that handle catastrophic personal injury and wrongful death cases throughout the United States. We regularly co-counsel and joint venture with firms across the country. Over the last several years, we have paid millions of dollars in joint venture co-counsel fees to the law firms we work with. If you are a law firm or attorney and have a catastrophic personal injury or wrongful death case you would like to joint venture or work with Zinda Law Group on, please reach out to us at 800-863-5312 or email us at info@zdfirm.com and we can set up a time to discuss your case.
And so we talked about how you get people to do what you want to do. How about volume-wise? I've seen all sorts of different volume. I've unfortunately, at one point in my career, had 200 cases and 3 legal assistants. They were all little cases, luckily, by myself. That's not a good way to practice. I have a lot less than that now. On the other hand, you see Jude Basile, who has 1 to 4 cases at a time. That's all he wants, and won't take more than 4 cases, which I think is great for him if you can get those right 4 cases. I think it's hard for a lot of people to sustain. What is the level where you found makes sense for balancing, quality with being able to, have enough cases to make money with a lawyer?
Well, that's a great question. And I think it all starts with the idea of how much money do you want your firm to make and what's the life cycle of your cases. So we find that our attorneys, we typically want them to have at least 36 if they're working on larger cases, because this can take 2 to 3 years. That means you're settling one case or going to trial on one case once a month. Or if you're handling a more moderate docket, we want the attorneys to have between 50 and 60 cases, because that means you're resolving a case once a month or once a week. And we track the length of time that our cases take to resolve. So every case that comes in is plugged into our system. We call it the vault, and we track the length of the case. We tag cases with different characteristics. If it's a trucking, if it happened in Williamson County, if it was a 48-year-old male, and it's all put in the system so we can predict how long we think a case is going to take based on our historical analysis going back 7 or 8 years. And so on average, our cases take about 9.3 months to resolve. And so we know if we want this attorney to hit this revenue marker, they're going to need this type of case. And then we classify the cases as catastrophic, severe, or moderate. And if you're handling a catastrophic case, that counts as 3 moderate cases. And each attorney has a cap on the number of cases they can handle. And so whereas at a lot of firms, you may want your attorneys to have many cases as possible. We really want to try to cap that so our attorneys can put in the time with the clients and the time to really thinking through the strategy. Because we want that younger attorney who's working on the moderate cases in 2 years to be working on the catastrophic cases. And you can't just jump up to the big leagues if you haven't been doing it the right way the whole time.
Absolutely. I have found at my firm as the volume of cases per lawyer has gone down, the revenue per lawyer has gone up, and the time on desk, or the time between opening and closing, has also gone down. Because that's one way to make more money per year, is just to turn the case quicker without settling it cheap. Obviously, you don't want to get in that. And how do you avoid that? In a volume practice, there is a temptation to just churn them and burn them, bring them in, settle them for what you can get, and go to the next one. Minimize the outlay, minimize the work. How do you deal with the temptation that lawyers might have to do that, and making sure that you do quality work and get top dollar?
I think it all starts with the top and setting the right message to your attorneys from leadership down. And our firm is pretty turns down a lot of cases. We sign up 1 out of every 10 cases that we talk to.
Wow.
And so the attorneys are doing a good job on that front end of vetting to make sure it's a good case. Then when that case is signed up, the attorney analyzes the case. They do what's called a case strategy memo. And an example of how we use technology in this regard is, as soon as the meeting with the client's over, our attorneys do a voice memo to the file, which is a data dump of everything they can think of about the client, about the case. It's like a little mini opening statement almost, except it has some of the cons to the case as well.
Right.
And then at that point, they come up with somewhat of an idea of what do they think this case is roughly going to turn out 9 months from now. It's obviously not very predictive, but it gives a rough idea. And then as the case is progressing, they update that each month. And then prior to resolution time, they have to get it approved by their senior attorney. So each attorney works with one of our senior lawyers, and then by me. And so every case is vetted to make sure that it's the right outcome for the client.
That's awesome. Yeah, because you hear stories, and I'm sure it doesn't happen very often of lawyers, they want to hit their numbers, so they'll go settle them cheap, and they make more money that month. But and one, it's not right for the clients, and two, in the long run, the firm makes less money because you get a short. It's like you sell everything you have cheap, and then what do you have left? And then also when you get a reputation for selling cheap, that's going to be in the great databases that the insurance companies have, and they're going to know they don't have to go pony up more money that you'll give in.
Well, one thing we also do is we reward the attorneys for, we call them effort metrics. So it's not necessarily the end result of getting the fee, but are you pushing the case along? So each month our attorneys don't necessarily have a quota on fees, but they do have a quota on metrics, which is depositions, mediations, trials, demands, lawsuits filed, to show the case is being pushed. And they get high-fived and rewarded based on pushing the case, and not necessarily, they do get rewarded on the outcome, but it's to give a marker leading up to the outcome.
That's interesting. Have you ever read The 4 Disciplines of Execution?
No, I haven't.
It's a great book. I read it, and it's kind of, they say like, you have leading measures and trailing measures. So the amount of money that's brought in on a case, our case settlements are trailing measures. That happens after all the work is done. If you want to change or improve behavior, you have to analyze what the leading measures are. What are the things people do that lead to that outcome? And so like at our firm, we actually have a weekly meeting, and I had brought the team and started with the people that were more successful so they could teach the ones that were not moving cases as well. What are the things that we do that cause cases to be ready for trial and lead to resolution? And after like a 2-hour meeting, it was decided it was filing a lawsuit, getting the trial date, taking the key depositions, getting all the records and reviewing them, and sending demands. And so we have a weekly meeting. It's 20 minutes, and every lawyer, first of all, talks about, did I do what I promised to do the last meeting? Then we review our numbers, both the trailing measures and the actual outcomes. And then we make a promise of the 1 to 3 things we're going to do the next week above and beyond our regular job to, I'm going to send a demand in this case. I'm going to get these depots set. I'm going to get a mediation set. It's had a great effect because we've just learned to focus on those and to reward that behavior and encourage that behavior instead of focusing on the end result, which honestly is 3 to 9 months after you do the right thing.
I think that's a great idea. That is really smart and a great approach, because I think life's about being intentional, and by taking the time to be intentional, it's going to lead to better success for the firm.
And what it also told me is I can't try to improve 10 things at the firm at once. Get this thing done, get that working, and then find the next thing.
Well, you and I sound very similar on the ideas front. I have notebooks and notebooks of ideas, and what I had to learn the hard way is that you can't do all of them.
Yeah, I'm still learning that. You're much better on the implementation front, though, it sounds like.
I maybe. TBD. You're talking about pushing cases. Another thing that we do through our platform is there's a report the attorney can run that shows the health of their docket. And so it's not necessarily the health of any individual case, but it shows how many cases that it's been more than 120 days in lit and you don't have a trial date. How many cases have been in pre-litigation more than 6 months? And they get a score based on these different numbers. Now, it doesn't mean that they could have a bad score, but they could have a great docket, because there's exceptions. If you have 40 medical malpractice cases, those are a different animal than a car wreck case. But it's a good way to look and see, should I look further into this? And it's a way to tell the attorneys, hey, take a look at these 10 or 12 cases and see, is there anything we could do? Maybe there's not, but take a look at them and see. And it's a way to automate that process. So I don't have to pay someone to sit and review each file. The platform does it for them. So
given that you have a fairly large number of attorneys, what kind of meetings do you have and how often do you have them?
So we brought on a person we call a docket manager, who is like the coach for the team. And then that docket manager, the attorney, also works with a senior litigator at the firm. And the docket manager meets with their attorney once a week, and it's a touch base, how are things going, going through their docket. And then the senior attorney meets with that associate once a month, and that's usually more on, and also on an as-needed basis on strategy of cases and kind of big picture items and individual case advice. And so one thing we're big on is collaboration. And so, an attorney may meet with several different lawyers in the firm to get advice on a certain issue, but there's always a required meeting with their docket manager at least once a week. And it's been an interesting dynamic, because they're not technically that attorney's boss. So we tell them, you guys can disagree. And we really encourage debate. And that's actually been a challenge that we're trying to overcome, is I want my associate to come into my office and say, hey, I think you're not handling that case right. I think we should do it this way. And we have that open environment where we can talk it through. And I say, well, I've handled cases like this. Maybe you're right. And we can debate it. And so the docket manager is there to be more of a coach. And they can disagree. And then it goes to the senior attorney to kind of decide the tie.
That's great. And is the docket manager a non-lawyer?
No, that's an attorney.
Oh, it's actually an attorney that's the docket manager.
And they practice as well. Everyone who's an attorney, including the trained development attorney, practice law in some capacity. Because I don't think you can do that job without being in the trenches with your team.
So I guess he or she would have a smaller docket, I would imagine.
They typically work on 3 to 5 cases at a time max, maybe as little as 2. Then we also do a lot of second chairing on cases. And so if you're a younger attorney, you want to work on the biggest case in the law firm, you go to that attorney and say, hey, can I be the second chair on that file? And they say, great, you're in charge of client contact. and then they get a role in that litigation. So a lot of those, the docket manager and the training development attorney, are second chairs in some of the bigger cases in the firm. And so they're also required to take depositions, to go to mediation, to go to trial themselves, because you got to keep your skills sharp.
Absolutely.
I feel like we're going to be hiring people after this.
These
These are great ideas.
They are, and when we're having our partners retreat in about we're having our firm retreat next week. We're having our partners retreat in a little over a month, and so I'm going to take some of this stuff.
I would love to hear about your partner retreat, because that's something that I've been wanting to do for several years. It's just been a matter of like being intentional about it and figuring out, is it worth the time? Is it worth the investment?
It hasn't always been. I'll be honest. Depends on who is there and how dedicated they are to the process. And I used to go places like Napa and New Orleans and stuff, and I found that the partying gets in the way of the. So this year we're going to do it local. We may go back to having a great trip sometime, but all I know is all I have on the agenda right now is where we are, where we want to be, and how we're going to get there.
I think that's plenty. That's a mouthful.
Plenty for 2 days of being. But the biggest thing is that we want the three of us to be. We love all the people we work with, but out of the office with no interruptions, able to just focus on the big picture. And I think we have to do that once a year, because you get so caught up in the day-to-day of the cases and everything else that if you don't step back, then things can slip, or you can just not go the direction that you want to end up going.
Well, I think that's really smart. We've been trying to develop a lot of committees within the firm to try to get more collaboration and to try to get stuff growing more organically, because the bigger you get, it's really tough to have a top-down structure. So, each year we try to do charitable initiatives. And so that pretty much entails me sitting down and thinking, what the heck are we going to do, and making a list. But we did a charity committee this year, and the young attorneys just kind of ran with it on their own and came up with it and organically created it.
So if you have someone else who has a law firm, either solo, want to add somebody else, or a mid-sized firm wanting to grow, what advice do you have for adding lawyers?
I would say decide why you need to add an attorney. One of the biggest mistakes I see a lot of law firms make, especially solos, is they have about 50% more work than they can handle. So they hire an associate, and that associate does that work pretty fast. Then there's not enough work for that person to do, and the solo says, well, go find more work. And the person you brought on has no way of doing that. And they end up losing the person, and the cycle starts all over again. So I think the first thing is figure out why you want that person and what you're going to have them do, and do you have enough work to do it. But once you've decided that, I think you got to make sure you're spending time looking at the financials. Attorneys are notoriously bad business people, and I think if you're going to own your own practice, you've got to look at the business of your practice like a case. There's a system, there's a method to do these things, and you've got to be as disciplined about that as you are about the best case you have. And so budgeting out, do I have enough run room to bring on an associate and be comfortable with them not generating revenue for 6 months or 9 months? And can I sustain that, or is that going to create a strain on everything else? Am I not going to be able to fund, I use this money for case expense because I'm paying an associate? And then do I have enough work for that?
And I found the opposite problem. I can bring in enough work to hire 20 or 30 attorneys, but I'm just choosing, maybe I need to say no to a lot more of that work because I don't want to run a law firm with 20 or 30 attorneys. I'm proud of you for doing it. It's just not what I want to do anymore. I did my EMyth. I plotted out what I wanted, and when I got it, I realized it didn't make me happy.
I think that's so. You got to follow your own North Star. I think the attorneys, most of the attorneys that I admire most are solo practitioners.
Well, I'm a 7 lawyer firm, so we're not. I love my 7 lawyer firm.
Right.
I want to keep it 7, and if we grow, it'll be add an associate for a partner, not but it'll be a different kind of growth and not as rapid. Not going from 4 to 10 in 2 years. That was just I didn't have the business skills to handle that right.
Well, I think it's about what do you want out of your law firm. I think that's another question a lot of attorneys don't ask a lot is what do I want from my practice? A friend of mine when I first started practicing in Williamson County loved coaching soccer, but he was a patent lawyer also. So he created his practice to where he could work a couple days a week, make really good money. He was a solo, he had his clients, and he just wanted enough work to work 2 days a week, and then he traveled and coached soccer the other 3. And he loved it, and that firm was extremely successful for him. And I think you don't want to copy anybody else. You want to figure out, what does success mean to me? Do I want to have a lifestyle law firm where I get to spend, as much time with my family as humanly possible and travel? Or do I want to grow and have a lot of people? Do I want to focus just on medical malpractice and that's what drives me? What are the things that I want out of the practice?
And how much of a life do you get to have running a firm of this size?
Well, I have really hard and fast rules on family time and personal time. And as with other things, I try to be very intentional about it. So I have a little alarm that goes off on my phone every day at 6 p.m. says, go home.
Wow.
Now, I don't always do that, but it's a reminder that that's what I should be doing. And I try to make sure I spend at least 2 to 3 hours with my kids every day, come heck or high water. And then at least one weekend day is like off limits for work. So Saturday is typically just family, just kids, no work. But it's always a struggle. It's a challenge. I find myself pulled between family, being a business person, and being an attorney.
Yep.
And trying to balance each of those three.
And the difference between being in the room with your kids and being present with your kids.
100%. Something I've started doing that I've found really helpful is I turn my phone off as soon as I get home and I put it in a drawer. Because I find if I don't turn it off, I'll somehow find it. And I'll somehow check. I'm like, how did this in my hand?
Yeah.
I thought I got rid of you. So by turning it off, it just makes it even harder to go find the thing and turn it back on.
I remember a few years ago, I had my wife is very, very particular who could babysit our children. So we probably had our first dinner alone in, probably a couple of years. And I noticed at one point in dinner, she was on Facebook and I was checking email. Not a good thing. And so I actually, when I went on vacation last year, I did not bring a phone with me.
Wow. That is great. How'd it go?
It was awesome. I was intentional about it. Most of our cases are on referral. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of different referring lawyers, but we have probably a group of 8 to 10 firms that give us a majority of our work. I let them all know that I'm going to be gone and off the grid for 14 days, that these are the people on the cases that you're handling. These are the lawyers. These are the legal assistants. This is the management person. These are the partners. If there's an issue, this is whatever the issue. If it's a new case, if it's a problem with an existing case, if you want just a question, this is who you can talk to. And this is the person that knows where I'm staying and could get a hold of me if there was a true emergency. And there were no true emergencies.
That's awesome. I'm going to have to try that. That's a great idea.
Yeah, I'm doing it again this summer. I'm going to take 4 weeks off this summer in a row. I'm going to go at least 2 without a phone.
Wow.
And it was liberating. And my wife had her phone. Mm-hmm. The hotel rooms had phones. If there was a true emergency, they would have been able to get a hold of me.
It's amazing that we were all able to survive without phones.
I couldn't
for all of human history.
Yeah, and when I started, they had cell phones when I started practicing, but I couldn't afford them because there was like 45 cents a minute. And, when you're doing Allstate disputed liability, low impact chiropractor cases, with the phone rates back then, you couldn't afford one.
I remember, another thing you're talking about affording a phone is we try to be very conscious on our budget when it comes to stuff we don't necessarily need. We always try to put things, do we want or do we need it? And try to make sure we're being cognizant of what are we taking away from financially if we go get this really fancy conference room table versus one that's really nice, but it's not as nice as this one over here.
Right.
And having a really firm, I think if you're going to have your own practice, you've got to have a good budgeting process.
Yeah, Judge John Black, he's passed away since, but he told me early on, and it hasn't sunk in as much as it needs to with me, but it's not what you make, it's what you keep.
Yeah, 100% right. And, we were talking about our phones and distractions. I really try to coach our attorneys on getting away from their phones and not checking email constantly. And we don't police what people go on their computers. We kind of judge based on success or results. But if I find an attorney that's staying to the office 8 o'clock on a regular basis, I say, you may be an organizational problem. Why don't you count how many times you open your Outlook throughout the day? And it's not because you're like doing something frivolous. An email may come in on a case, but check it once a day, twice a day. Be intentional about it. Opposed to every 5 minutes, it's like a gerbil gets a little piece of cheese. You pop up, oh, check that. What's that? What's that?
Exactly.
And you actually only get 2 hours of productive work in the whole day.
Yeah, I found that there were points in my life where I didn't really feel like working, but I felt like I had to be there. And so I would do email, I would do check up on the listservs, and so I would look busy, and I would get nothing accomplished. Mm-hmm. And I would be there for 9 hours, would have done nothing, but at least nobody could criticize me because I was there on the computer. Whereas I can, get up early in the morning, work uninterrupted at home for an hour or two, and get in, and I can do in 4 hours. Now I still work a lot of hours, but I could get done in 4 hours what I could have done in 8 or 9 had I been interrupted phone calls, emails. Do you take unscheduled phone calls?
I do not. I really try to avoid that, and I'm very upfront with my clients. I tell my clients at every initial client meeting, said, listen, when you call the office, my paralegal is going to schedule a meeting for us to talk. You can call as many times as you want. Now, hopefully they don't call every day, 3 times a day. I've had clients like that. I'm sure we all have. But I say, my paralegal schedules a time to meet and talk about your case, either over the phone or in person, and it can be the same day or the next day. But it's so I can focus just on your file. I'll have your file in front of me. I'll be prepared to talk about what you want to talk about, opposed to I'm thinking about 10 other things and someone calls and interrupts us, and now I can't work on your case. And I've found when I explain that to people, they have zero qualms with doing it that way.
Yeah, I found the same thing. I mean, there's a couple of people that don't like it, but you can't represent everybody.
Right.
But generally, I said, look, when I'm working on your case, I don't want anyone interrupting me. Mm-hmm. I want to focus on nothing but your case. And for the same thing, when I'm working on someone else's case, that's what I'm going to do, because then that way I have that focus to give to yours. And we will meet, we will talk. It's just when I'm doing something, I have to finish doing it before I move on to the next thing, because that's how I want to get you the results you need. Because if I'm checking email and checking texts and taking phone calls while I'm working on your case, you're not getting my best effort.
When we tell our attorneys to turn off their computer monitors if they're having an important conversation with a client, because you'll be distracted and not even know it. So I tell them, just flip it off when you're on the phone, take out a notepad as if they're sitting across from you, and you'll be amazed by how more engaged you seem.
Wow.
Because I'm sure we've all been in these conversations, right? You're on the phone, and all of a sudden you just kind of, I'll just open Outlook real quick.
Yep.
And you open Outlook, and you're like, oh, look, that's weird. And then you look up, you're like, I haven't been paying attention to what this person's been saying for 10 minutes. And now there's silence on the other end.
I need to do that with my wife, too. When I talk to her, because I know there's been times when she's caught me not knowing what we're talking about.
Well, the other thing that I'm a big believer in is that willpower is overrated. I think you've got to set yourself up for success by setting the atmosphere that you want to do in order to be successful. Like, you and I don't have our laptops out right now.
No.
If we did, we'd be setting ourselves up for failure, because you and I would be doing other things while we're doing this. The same when you're dealing with the client. Make sure, we always tell our attorneys, make sure you're prepared when you're going to meet with the client. Think through what you're going to say, visualize it, set yourself up for success.
So one thing that's always a struggle is the difference between, to run a law firm, there's a lot of managerial and organizational things that have to be done. And, sometimes at the bigger firms, you get the lawyer at the top, that's all they do. And then a lot of us like to try cases. Mm-hmm. How is that balanced in your practice?
Like with everything, it's about being intentional. And I make sure that I am the lead attorney on at least 10 cases at any given time. And I make sure that I've blocked off at least 4 hours every day focused on working on those 10 files. So whether taking depositions, taking expert depositions, talking to experts, and forcing myself to go into those. And we were talking before about how willpower is overrated. Because I have awesome attorneys I've worked with. One attorney, Joe Caputo, my partner at the firm, he's worked with me since he was an intern.
Wow.
Intern, law clerk, an associate now, 6 years. And so I can give him anything, and he's going to do it probably the same way I would do it. Maybe like 1% less. But no, he's great, and it's really easy for me to hand that off to him. So I'll set myself up for success by saying, I'm the only one scheduled for this deposition or this mediation, so I have to go. And so no one else can go to this. Otherwise, I would have a tendency to say, hey, well, this fire came up, I have to do this interview, and so I force myself to do those things. Because at the end of the day, our firm is about helping people. I really think it's important that you have a North Star for why you're doing what you do in life, whether it's professionally or personally. And our firm is about helping as many people with meaningful cases as we can. Sometimes that means saying no to a case. But I want to make sure that all of our attorneys can look the client in the eye and say, I was the best lawyer for your case. And we got the best outcome that we think was humanly possible for this client.
And how do you instill that culture, in other lawyers who work for you?
So we have core principles that we talk about in the interview process. We talk about at the hiring process. And anytime something's going wrong with an attorney or a file, we reflect back to those. And those core principles are excellence always. And to us, that means putting the client's interests first, always looking at the case from their point of view, and doing things well at every single level. And that's our number one principle, and all the others are subservient to that. The second is we only want the best to work at our law firm. Doesn't mean that there's that the person's necessarily the best in the world right then, but they have the potential to be great. We want every client to feel like we would treat our best friend if we were representing them in the file.
That's awesome. I could talk to you for hours and hours more, but podcast has its kind of natural time period. I know I have learned a lot. I hope our listeners have too, that I'm going to apply in my practice, and I hope we get to speak again.
Thank you. It's been great.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of The Effective Lawyer. A big thank you to Michael Cowen and all of the great team at Trial Lawyer Nation. I really enjoyed being on his podcast. Please go check it out, especially if you want to practice plaintiff's law. His firm is one of the best, and his show is one of the best at learning the ins and outs of becoming a great plaintiff's lawyer. I hope everyone is safe and well and has a great holiday season. Thanks. Until next time.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of The Effective Lawyer. If you enjoyed this podcast, please take a moment to rate it 5 stars and leave us a review. To get notified about new episodes that are upcoming or have been released, go to zdfirm.com/podcast to sign up for our mailing list.